Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the absolute fastest, most foolproof way to secure an unprecedented economic victory on the global stage is to intentionally, methodically bankrupt your own citizens? And would you believe me if I said that the true mastermind of international trade isn't the leader whose nation makes the most money, but the one who brilliantly figures out how to make his people so utterly destitute that they can no longer afford to buy anything from anyone else? I know it sounds utterly counterintuitive to the untrained ear. I know it sounds like the raving lunacy of a madman. But today, right here and right now, I stand before you as a reformed man, a man who has finally seen the light. For years, I was blind. I have to come clean and make a grand apology. In the past, I stood atop my proverbial soapbox and loudly declared that the current United States economic policies were going to be an unmitigated disaster. When the President of the United States stood at a podium, puffed out his chest, and declared that tariff is his absolute favorite word in the English dictionary, I scoffed. When he promised that Americans were going to win and keep winning some more, and that they would win so much they would eventually get tired of winning, I laughed. I called him an economic illiterate. I called him a bombastic buffoon. I assumed, like so many other traditional analysts, that trade wars were bad, that alienating allies was foolish, and that making goods more expensive for the middle class was political suicide. But really, what did I know? I'm just a mere mortal. I only took 2 measly years of economic theory at the university level before I haughtily dropped out, deciding the concepts of supply and demand were far too trivial for my massive intellect, and switched my major to physics. What a colossal, arrogant mistake that was. I was operating under the archaic, primitive assumption that a thriving economy requires a wealthy consumer base. I was playing checkers, maybe even tic-tac-toe. The president, however, has been playing 4-dimensional intergalactic economic chess this entire time. And today, we are going to break down the sheer, unparalleled brilliance of his master plan. But before we expose this brilliant strategy, take 1 second to hit that subscribe button down below. It helps the channel bring you more of these deep dives, and hey, it's completely free, which is great, because as we're about to learn, we are all going to need to save every single penny we can get our hands on. To truly appreciate this brilliance, we need to look at the actual economic scoreboard, because right now, America is faltering while the rest of the world surges ahead. Let us look at the headlines, shall we? Because the headlines, unlike my previous rudimentary understanding of macroeconomics, do not lie. Right now, the president's team is bravely struggling to spin the absolute worst job numbers the United States has seen since the dark days of the Great Recession. And what is the response from the political elite? Deflection, of course. Look at the Dow, they cry. The Dow, the Dow. That's what we should be talking about. Ah, yes, let's talk about the stock market. Let us observe the magnificent success of the American financial sector. Reuters recently published a piece outlining a massive foundational shift in global finance. The patriotic slogan has officially transitioned from Buy America to Buy America. The Wall Street exodus isn't just a trickle, it is gathering pace, transforming into a torrential downpour of capital fleeing the United States. And where is all that sweet, sweet capital going? Look to the north. Welcome to Canada, folks. While the U.S. is busy building invisible walls of tariffs and shouting at its neighbors, Canada is quietly, politely sweeping up the spoils. Foreign investment in Canada has just surged to its strongest, most robust level since the golden days of 2007. Let me paint you a clearer picture of this winning. Of the 10 countries with the largest stock markets by market capitalization on the planet, how do you think the mighty United States performed in 2025? First? Second? Surely top 3? No, my friends. The United States performed 8th best, 8th. Out of 10. It takes a very special kind of economic stewardship to take the world's most dynamic financial engine and throttle it down to 8th place. And who finished first? Canada. Yes, the polite maple syrup-loving nation to the north, previously thought of by many Americans as just a giant national park, absolutely dominated the global financial markets. Their TSX index is soaring. In fact, if we want to talk about stock markets, that's the one we should be talking about. The TSX is the new gold standard. By the way, if you are watching this from north of the border, go ahead and drop a maple leaf emoji or a quick thank you in the comments right now. You guys have definitely earned your victory lap this year. While the U.S. is locked in a bitter, self-destructive trade war, new 2026 numbers have just been released showing that China's exports surged massively in January and February. And here is the kicker. They surged despite waning trade with the United States. The globe is moving on. In Canada, booming overseas trade just propelled the port of Vancouver to absolute record cargo volumes. The ships are coming in, the goods are flowing, the money is changing hands. It's just bypassing American ports entirely. According to recent data, the number of Canadian companies that export only to the U.S. has been cut nearly in half. They looked at the volatility, they looked at the tariffs, they looked at the bombastic rhetoric, and they collectively said, you know what? Europe looks nice this time of year. Let's call Japan. The world is adapting. Meanwhile, back in the land of the free, the United States trade deficit, the very monster the president swore to slay with his mighty sword of tariffs, totaled a staggering $91 billion in 2025. It barely budged. Despite all the chest thumping, despite all the levies, despite the aggressive restructuring of global supply chains, the deficit remained stubbornly, hilariously high. Are Americans tired of winning yet? Because looking at these numbers, the sheer exhaustion of this much victory must be taking a toll. Which brings us to the core of this 4D chess tariff strategy, erasing the deficit through engineered poverty. Even the Wall Street Journal, that bastion of capitalist thought, recently published a lengthy report attempting to explain why the tariffs simply aren't shrinking the U.S. trade deficit. The president, in his infinite wisdom, is doubling down on these levies, which has naturally prompted every single major trade partner to boost support for their own exports and retaliate in kind. How could I have missed the brilliance of this? I was too busy criticizing the man to see the magnificent architecture of his plan. I should have listened to exactly what he was saying. He said he wanted to decrease the trade deficit. He wanted Americans to buy less from other countries, and he wanted other countries to buy more from the United States. And friends, he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. It is just taking a tiny bit longer than he initially projected, and the mechanism of action is so profoundly dark that normal economists couldn't comprehend it. Here's how the master plan actually works. Follow closely, because this is Nobel Prize level economic theory. For decades, the United States was the richest country in the world, specifically when measured by consumer spending. The American consumer was the undisputed heavyweight champion of capitalism. They had the most disposable income, the highest standard of living, and an insatiable appetite for goods. Because they were the richest people on earth, they naturally went out and bought stuff. They bought electronics from Asia, cars from Europe, produce from South America. They bought everything from everyone, simply because they were so wealthy they could afford it. Meanwhile, just about every other consumer in the rest of the world was, relatively speaking, poorer than the American consumer. Therefore, they bought less American stuff. It was a terrible, glaring imbalance, a trade deficit born out of sheer American prosperity. The president looked at this prosperity, looked at this massive disposable income, and thought, this is a disaster. I must fix this. And what is the only logical, foolproof way to fix an imbalance where your citizens buy too much because they are too rich? You initiate aggressive, punitive policies that make the American consumer significantly, undeniably poorer. It is a stroke of pure, unadulterated genius. Let's walk through the mechanics of the tariff. The president slaps a massive import tax on foreign goods. Now he tells the public that China or Europe is paying this tax. But we all know, and he secretly knows in his labyrinthine mind, that U.S. companies pay those import tariffs at the border. So the cost of the raw materials, the microchips, the steel, the textiles that U.S. companies buy immediately goes up. Because corporations are not charities, they don't just absorb these costs. They pass them directly onto the American consumer by increasing their retail prices. Concurrently, to protect their profit margins, they cut back on internal expenses. So now, the average American walks into a store and finds that everything, from their groceries, to their appliances, to their clothing, is suddenly 20%, 30%, or 40% more expensive. Because the prices have skyrocketed, Americans are forced to buy less. They start cutting back on discretionary spending. They cancel vacations, they delay buying a new car, they stop remodeling their homes. When consumers stop buying, corporate revenues plummet. And what happens when corporate revenues plummet? The companies have to start laying people off. First, it's just a few hundred here and there, then it's thousands. The unemployment rate begins its majestic, victorious climb upward. As more and more people are laid off, there are fewer and fewer Americans with disposable income. The middle class gets squeezed into oblivion. Eventually, the vast majority of Americans become poorer and poorer and poorer. And here is the magic trick. Here is the grand finale of the 4D chess match. If the Americans are poor, they can't buy imported goods anymore. They can't afford the German cars, or the Japanese electronics, or the Italian shoes. They can barely afford generic bread. And if they import less stuff, the trade deficit must logically go down. He's right. He was right all along. We mere mortals, with our pathetic desires for a thriving middle class and a robust job market, simply didn't understand the scope of the plan. You see, if you want your country's consumers to buy less from other countries, you don't make better domestic products. You don't innovate. You don't compete on quality. No, you just make your citizens so devastatingly poor that they are priced out of the global market entirely. It's a winning strategy. Another victory. Another massive, crippling win for the American public. Just like he said, they are getting tired of winning. They are getting deeply, exhaustingly tired of getting poor. But the sheer genius of this plan doesn't stop at domestic impoverishment. It extends to a breathtakingly bold foreign policy focused on alienating the globe, ensuring the rest of the world simply moves on without us. Think about the traditional model of international relations. Normal presidents try to foster goodwill. They engage in diplomacy. They try to make their country an attractive destination for foreign tourists, international students, and global business investments. Why? Because when foreigners come to your country, they bring their foreign money and inject it directly into your local economy. It's free money. But our visionary leader looked at that and said, no, that is weak. That is not winning. Instead, he pioneered a groundbreaking new diplomatic strategy, insulting, berating, and actively threatening countries all over the world. He realized that if you mock your allies, tear up established treaties, and launch unpredictable, late-night digital tirades against foreign dignitaries, you can successfully frighten away all those annoying tourists and their pesky cash. Why on earth would a wealthy European or Asian tourist want to come spend their vacation dollars in a country that is actively threatening them with trade wars and hostile rhetoric? They won't. They'll go to Canada. They'll go to Australia. They'll stay home. This brilliantly cuts off a massive stream of revenue to the U.S. service and hospitality sectors, further accelerating the glorious march toward nationwide poverty, and consequently, a lower trade deficit. Furthermore, by aggressively attacking allied nations and attempting to strong-arm the globe, he has managed to achieve something truly historic. He has incentivized the entire rest of the world to start trading with itself, completely excluding the United States. It is a beautiful thing to watch. The global community looked at the erratic, hostile behavior of the U.S. administration and collectively realized they didn't actually need to deal with the headache. They are forging new alliances. They are signing massive free trade agreements across the Pacific and throughout Europe that leave America standing out in the cold, pressing its nose against the glass. So let's review the grand equation. As the American consumer keeps getting squeezed by domestic tariffs, losing their jobs, and plummeting into poverty, their spending on imports drops to near zero. Simultaneously, as the rest of the world increases frictionless trade amongst themselves, their economies boom, their consumers get richer, their middle classes expand. Eventually, the scales will tip completely. The United States will become a deeply impoverished, isolated nation, while the rest of the world enjoys unparalleled wealth and interconnected prosperity. And when that happens, the trade deficit will finally balance itself out. He will have won again. The United States will have achieved the ultimate victory of a balanced ledger, paid for with the total destruction of its own economic supremacy. And that, my friends, brings us to the ultimate victory, a completely deficit-free, entirely isolated America. So, I ask you, who among you saw this coming? Who among you possessed the intellectual fortitude to realize that the president was correct about absolutely everything he said? Who knew that imposing import taxes that U.S. corporations and citizens are forced to pay would squeeze the economy so tightly that mass layoffs were inevitable? Who knew that starting diplomatic fires all over the globe would isolate the American market and force the world to move on without us? He is going to go down in history. He will be remembered forever as the singular genius who finally fixed the United States trade deficit problem. And he will have done it by ensuring the country is simply too poor to actually have a deficit. When the dust settles, the United States will finally join the ranks of those elite, highly successful global economies that proudly boast trade surpluses. I'm talking about the real economic heavyweights. We will stand shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Angola. We will share the podium with the Democratic Republic of Congo. We will high-five the Dominican Republics, Lesotho, and Vietnam. What do all these victorious nations have in common? They have magnificent trade surpluses. Why? Because a vast majority of their populations are economically disadvantaged to the point where importing luxury foreign goods is a mathematical impossibility. They export whatever raw materials they have and they buy almost nothing in return. It is the perfect deficit-free model. And it is exactly what the United States is rapidly hurtling towards. The answer to our economic woes was right there, hiding in plain sight. We just have to regress our economic development by about a century. In this glorious, victorious future, the United States will be entirely self-reliant. We will have to manufacture absolutely everything within our own borders. Every single thing we consume, we will have to make. It will be perfectly fine. We are resilient people. Sure, it might be a bit of a shock to the system. Building complex semiconductors from scratch without global supply chains will take a few decades. Rebuilding a massive, dirty, 19th century style manufacturing base to produce cheap plastic goods will certainly do wonders for our local environment. But we will survive. We will make our own clothes, build our own cars, and forge our own steel, completely cut off from the innovations and efficiencies of the global market. There are only a few minor hiccups in this utopian vision of absolute isolationism. The agriculture sector might face some geographical challenges. We will have to figure out how to satisfy the American demand for certain goods using only domestic soil. Bananas, for instance, are going to be tough. I look forward to the heroic efforts of farmers in North Dakota attempting to cultivate a thriving tropical banana plantation in the dead of winter. And coffee? Well, Americans might have to get used to waking up to a hot, steaming mug of boiled dandelion roots because importing those rich, flavorful beans from Colombia or Ethiopia would ruin our beautiful, poverty-driven trade surplus. But hey, who needs a morning latte when you're busy enjoying the thrill of constant, unyielding economic victory? But wait, the brilliance of this economic reset goes far beyond the agricultural hurdles of growing tropical fruit in the tundra. Let's talk about technology and the absolute masterclass we are witnessing in the deliberate dismantling of the modern digital economy. For years, the American tech sector, clustered in places like Silicon Valley, was supposedly the envy of the world. But our visionary leader spotted its fatal, unforgivable flaw. It relied heavily on international cooperation. It depended on Taiwanese microchips, rare earth metals from Asia, and a constant influx of top-tier software engineers from Europe and India. The president, with his eagle-eyed strategic vision, saw this for the insidious trap it truly was. Why should the greatest nation on earth be tethered to a complex global supply chain just to build a smartphone, run a cloud server, or manufacture an electric vehicle? His solution was as elegant as it was breathtaking. Tax the imported components and restrict the talent pool until the tech companies can no longer afford to build or invent anything at all. It is a magnificent, sweeping solution to our over-reliance on the 21st century. And naturally, the mainstream media is absolutely panicking about the so-called brain drain. They are whining incessantly that the world's top scientists, medical researchers, and engineers are fleeing the United States in droves. They are packing up their patents and their laboratories and relocating to, you guessed it, places like Toronto, London, and Tokyo. The traditional small-minded economists call this a generational catastrophe, but we know better now, don't we? I call it trimming the intellectual fat. We are successfully purging the nation of these pesky, globally-minded elites who stubbornly insist on international collaboration. Remember earlier when I told you I dropped out of physics because it was too complicated? Well, our fearless leader is essentially dropping the entire country out of advanced sciences, and the simplicity of it all is glorious. We do not need quantum computing. We certainly do not need artificial intelligence. Do you know what AI does? It takes away American jobs. By systematically crushing the tech industry through trade isolation and hostile immigration policies, we are proactively saving millions of jobs for hardworking Americans, who can now return to the noble, character-building physical labor of the 1800s. Think of the absolute unbridled freedom of this new, impoverished American lifestyle. The president isn't just balancing a ledger, he is forcing a nationwide macroeconomic minimalist lifestyle upon us. We are being liberated from the heavy burden of consumerism. When you can no longer afford a new flat-screen television because the tariffs have pushed the price into the stratosphere, you are finally free to rediscover the lost art of staring at a blank wall, or perhaps engaging in lively conversation with your family about how expensive the firewood has become. We are shedding the unnecessary weight of technological convenience. No more obsessively upgrading your phone every 2 years. You will use your current domestically trapped device until it crumbles into dust, and then, my friends, you will be entirely free from the digital tether. We will go back to communicating via the telegraph, or perhaps just shouting out of our windows. It is organic, it is locally sourced, and most importantly, it requires absolutely zero foreign imports. It is the ultimate manifestation of winning. But before we celebrate this too hard, it's time to swallow the bitter pill of reality. Okay, I am done. I'm stepping out of character. I can only keep this charade up for so long before the sheer absurdity of it gives me a migraine. For those of you sitting there, scratching your heads, genuinely confused by what is going on in this essay, or perhaps quietly nodding along, thinking I have finally embraced the administration's policies, I implore you to do one simple thing today. Go find a dictionary, open it up, look up the word sarcasm, then flip a few pages over and look up the word irony. Read those definitions very carefully, and then reread everything I have just said. The reality we are facing is not a victory. It is a slow-motion, entirely preventable tragedy. The policies of isolationism, the weaponization of tariffs, and the deliberate alienation of our global allies are not the moves of a geopolitical chess master. They are the flailing, destructive tantrums of an administration that fundamentally misunderstands how the modern world operates. You cannot tax your way to prosperity, you cannot insult your way to diplomatic dominance, and you certainly cannot destroy your own middle class and call it a win. While we sit here, arguing over political theater and spinning disastrous jobs reports, the rest of the world is not waiting for us to come to our senses. Canada is stepping up. Europe is solidifying its blocks. Asia is expanding its reach. The global economy is a moving train, and right now, the United States is standing on the tracks, demanding the train stop and pay a toll. It's not going to end well for the person on the tracks. So, as I sit here today, watching the Dow falter, watching the prices rise, and watching our neighbors to the north reap the benefits of our self-inflicted wounds, I can't help but wear a metaphorical "I choose Canada" cap. Because right now, looking at the data, looking at the reality of the situation, the Canadian model of open trade, stable alliances, and economic sanity looks a lot more like actual winning. And as for us, we are just going to have to figure out how to grow bananas in a blizzard. I want to hear from you guys. Head down to the comments and tell me, how are you handling all this winning? Are you packing your bags for Toronto, or are you starting a coffee farm in your living room? Let me know. And if you appreciate this kind of unapologetic, data-driven reality check, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells the algorithm that you actually prefer facts over political theater. Thank you for your time. Stay sharp and don't let anyone convince you that getting poorer is a form of victory. I'll catch you in the next video.